Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this CVSP 202 Common Lecture. My name is Mario Kozah. I teach Syriac and Islamic Studies at the Center for Arab and Middle Eastern Studies. And the lecture today will be more of a talk on classical Islamic thought, Ikhwan, Safa, and Al-Ghazali. Now, take a look at this miniature painting, and you see that it is from the Escorial Monastery, Madrid, a very important library from the 13th century Book of Chants. And you can see here two musicians. The one to your left is wearing Arab attire. The one to your left is wearing more European style attire of the time. The one on the left is playing the oud, and the one on the right is playing the lute. And it struck me that this miniature painting has a great deal of harmony about it, and that's not a pun. I think it is not just the fact that these two figures are playing music together, but that we have here an encounter of civilizations, an encounter of two rather different individuals with two very different cultures, but coming together in Al-Andalus, which was a time of great cultural efflorescence and a coming together of two civilizations, religions. And what came out of that, of course, were figures that you will be studying a bit later, figures such as Ibn Rushd, Averroes, figures such as the Jewish Ibn Maymun, Maimonides, and of course, Thomas Aquinas. And so Al-Andalus will come at a later stage in your course, but the reason I begin with this is because just as these two civilizations, these two cultures come together in such a productive way in Al-Andalus, the very beginnings, we go back to the very beginnings and we see a similar process of coming together, of interaction, and of production, cultural production, philosophical production, and architectural production, and theological also production. We go back to the 6th century now, to the pre-Islamic period, and you can see that the Middle East was governed by the Persian Empire, known as the Sassanids, the Byzantine Empire, the Romano-Greek Empire, and that these two empires had vassal kingdoms. The Arabs of the Byzantine Empire, who created a buffer zone known as the Ghassanids, the Ghassasina. And to the east, you had another tribe, the Lakhmids, who were vassals to the Persian Empire, to the Sassanids. The Lakhmids are known in Arabic as Al-Manadhira. Now, what is interesting about these two Arab tribes was that they were Christian in the main, and that they began a very interesting process of developing the Arabic script, which we will see in a little bit, in just a moment. Into Arabia, you can see of course, Mecca and Medina. To the south, you have the Himyarite kingdom, which was governed by a Jewish king. And you have down in the south Najran, and those crosses represent monasteries, churches, religious sites. You also have in East Africa the kingdom of Aksum, which was also a Christian kingdom. To the east, in the Persian Gulf, you see that the influence of the Lakhmids continues to, begins in the Iraq region, but extends its influence into Eastern Arabia. And there too, we have Syriac and Christian communities alongside both Arab and Persian communities. So the picture in the 6th century is what we describe as late antiquity. Historians describe it as late antiquity, was a picture of civilizations, religions coming together, or at least in geographical proximity with each other. And Arabia, as you can see, was hardly an empty space, hardly a desert. In fact, quite the contrary. You had many civilizations, you had many languages in Arabia, you had many scripts. Here you see some examples of the scripts that have been discovered in the Arabian Peninsula. You see up in the north, Safayitic. This is known as Old Arabic. You have Hismaic. In the Persian Gulf, you have Hasayitic. In the Hijaz region, you have Taymanitic, Dadanic. You have Thamudic, South Thamudic in the Yemen region, etc. So not only do you have kingdoms ruling different parts of Arabia and around, but also you have different scripts, different languages, and different communities present there. Looking at the three main languages and cultures at that time, you can see in blue Syriac culture and civilization dominating the northern Syria, eastern Turkey, northern Iraq region. And in red, you see the Nabatean kingdom, whose capital, as it were, center was Petra, Al-Batra, in Jordan today. And the Nabatean kingdom used Aramaic. Nabatean language is a dialect of Aramaic, and Syriac too is a dialect of Aramaic. And you see Arabic in green. And what may surprise you, I think, about Arabic is that our attestations, meaning our written evidence of Arabic, you can see we have some in Mada'in Saleh in the Hijaz, but you can see that you also have the earliest Arabic attestations, that is written evidence, in the Syria and Jordan regions, in Namara, Harran, Busra, and Jimal. So this is, of course, of great interest because we see that Arabic was not somehow contained in Arabia, as we imagine. Sometimes we imagine, perhaps as a result of the way that we have been educated about Arabia, that is where Arabic comes from. Well, that is up for discussion. That is still up for debate. And we have our earliest evidence of Arabic is coming not just from Arabia, but also from Syria and Jordan. And here we have the Namara inscription. I mentioned Namara. You can see the Namara inscription, 328 AD. This is one of the earliest Arabic inscriptions that we have to date. It is known as Old Arabic. You can see that the script is unrecognizable, I would suggest to you. It is not the Arabic script that you are familiar with. And that is because the earliest Arabs in the Jordan region, perhaps it was the Ghasasina, who began to develop a script to write Arabic in, were borrowing the Aramaic script of the Nabateans. So they used the Nabatean script to write Arabic in, and that is why you are unable to read this, but if you know Aramaic, you can read it, and when you read this in Aramaic, you can transcribe it into Arabic, that is modern Arabic script, and there you have the transcription into Arabic, but you may be imagining a particular Arabic in your minds, the Fusha Arabic. And so what I'll do is read a little of this Arabic to you. And to begin, نفس امرؤ القيس بن عمرو ملك العرب كله ذو أثر التاج وملك الأسدين ونزار وملوكهم وهرب محجو عكد وجاء بزجا. So just a little sample to help you understand that this is Old Arabic. And so once again, our expectations of what kind of Arabic we have at the time is now being explored. Now with the Islamic expansions coming out of Medina, we see that under the Umayyads, Arab and Islamic culture and civilization in the 7th century begins to spread all the way to Al-Andalus, to Spain, under the Umayyads, and further into the Iran area, to Bukhara, to Samarkand, and all of Arabia. And this is a moment where Islamic civilization is very much united under one empire, the Umayyads, and under that Umayyad empire, vast numbers, vast communities with various languages are under that umbrella, under the Umayyad imperial umbrella. Languages, cultures, civilizations, religions. And by the 16th century, you can see that the Islamic empire has expanded even further. All of that which is in orange is further Islamic expansion into the sub-Saharan, into India, and into Eurasia. Of course, by this point, Spain had been lost in the Reconquista, and that marked the end of the Andalusian civilization that I had that I had mentioned to you to begin with. In the empire after the Umayyads, you have the Abbasid Empire beginning in around 750. In 750, the Abbasids moved the Islamic Empire from Damascus to Baghdad, ultimately. And from that point on, you have what is known as the Abbasids, the Abbasid Empire, and with Baghdad as its cosmopolitan capital. And during this period, this is the period that is the focus of attention of the next couple of weeks. It is sometimes referred to as the Golden Age. People raise questions about this term. but ultimately I would say it is a moment, a high point in Islamic civilization. Why is it a high point in Islamic civilization? Because you get an explosion of writing, of literature in many, many different genres of writing. You have the exploration of many different types of genres of literature, and you have this wonderful coming together once again of different cultures in what I would call the houses of wisdom rather than the house of wisdom. You may have heard of Bayt al-Hikmah. Bayt al-Hikmah, understood to be the house of wisdom, that is the place where a translation movement took place. In fact, we are dealing with houses of wisdom all across the Abbasid Empire, where scholars would come together and from many different backgrounds come together, discuss intellectual, philosophical, scientific topics, and produce wonderful writings. And here you have two miniature paintings of how scholars would come together, not necessarily in one place. This could be in a mosque, it could be in a home, it could be in a library, it could be in a building specifically for this activity. And that is why I call it houses of wisdom rather than one single house of wisdom. We are not looking for some archaeological remain of the Bayt al-Hikmah. It was a movement rather than a physical building. Now, during this period, in the 8th and 9th centuries, the so-called House of Wisdom, one case study or one example of people involved in this activity. You have Yahya ibn al-Batriq in the 9th century, Hunayn ibn Ishaq, also middle of the 9th century, and you have Al-Kindi, and you have Ishaq ibn Hunayn. And these individuals, particularly Hunayn ibn Ishaq and Al-Kindi, of course, I have him in red because he represents, he is known in Arabic as Faylasuf al-Arab. He is the first Arab philosopher and known for this. But as you can see, he is also involved, heavily involved in the activities of the House of Wisdom. And what were these activities? These activities involved translation in the main. Translations as translations of Greek texts, translations of Syriac texts, what sort of topics, scientific, astronomical, philosophical, and also literary texts. Why do we have an interest in Syriac in the House of Wisdom? Because many of the Greek texts had been translated already into Syriac in the earlier periods. And so those who were able to translate for the caliphs, because of course this was sponsored by caliphs such as Harun al-Rashid and al-Ma'mun, and these caliphs were very interested in acquiring the scientific knowledge and the philosophical knowledge of the Greeks, and who was able to provide them with this knowledge, who was able to translate for them the Greek texts that they had acquired or other texts. It was those scholars who knew both Greek and Syriac and were able to convey this information, translate this information into Arabic. But as you can see, there was a team effort. So people like Yahya ibn al-Batriq, a Christian Arab, Hunayn ibn Ishaq, a Syriac Christian, and Al-Kindi, of course, the philosopher of the Arabs, and Ishaq ibn Hunayn, the son of Hunayn ibn Ishaq, bring together different expertise, I would say, bringing together the Greek knowledge that had been acquired over hundreds of years through a process of translating from the Greek to the Syriac. The terminology had been established already in the Syriac, and from that point on, the step from Syriac to Arabic is a much easier step once the terminology had been established. A lot of people ask me, why is it that in the House of Wisdom in Beit al-Hikmah, these scholars translated the Greek text first to Syriac and then to Arabic? Well, the reason is that the draft copy, as it were, into Syriac was very important, because these scholars had been trained to translate into Syriac. These scholars knew the terminology in Syriac. But once you had this text in Syriac as a draft, it became much easier to translate to Arabic and to develop a philosophical terminology in the Arabic. And a very easy example of this is the Greek philosophos. The word philosophos was for hundreds of years translated into Syriac as feilasufa. And of course, the term feilasufa becomes feilasuf in Arabic. And so you have these three steps in the process. You have a team effort. Al-Kindi, a native Arab from the tribe of Kinda, an aristocrat of the time, was, if you like, the one who polished the Arabic, the one who improved the Arabic, the one who also presented the finished copies to the caliphs. But the House of Wisdom does not end with these individuals. These are just examples of individuals who translated very important works at this time. The mathematical works of Euclid, the Geographia of Ptolemy, the logical writings of Aristotle, and many, many other Greek texts were translated at this point. By this time, they had been translated into Arabic pretty much everything that we have of Aristotle today. That is the extent of the scholarship of the time. The Baghdad school comes at the helm, or follows the House of Wisdom, the movement of the House of Wisdom, and here you get a focus on Aristotle, a much closer focus on Aristotle. Aristotle being, of course, known in Arabic as Al-Muallim Al-Awwal, the first teacher. That is because his writings on logic were considered to be the basis of all education. You took logic before you specialized in anything else. In the medieval period, in the medieval schools, and in the late antique schools, you start with logic. If you can't think logically, you cannot specialize, you cannot become a physician, you cannot become an astronomer, or anything. So it was the prerequisite of the time. And that is why Aristotle's logical writings were considered so important and should be translated into Arabic, because it was the foundation of the madrasas, of the schools of the time, that logic should be taught as the prerequisite of any further study. Abu Bishr Matta ibn Yunus was one of the leading lights of the Baghdad school and founder. And then you have Al-Farabi, the famous Persian philosopher known as Al-Muallim Al-Thani in the Islamic tradition, working with Abu Bishr Matta, who was a Syriac scholar, Al-Farabi a Muslim scholar, his student, and the student of Al-Farabi was Yahya ibn Adi, another Syriac scholar. So you see again in the Baghdad school a very interesting coming together once more under Aristotle of individuals from very different backgrounds, but coming together to discuss philosophy, to discuss Aristotle, to establish, to explain the meanings in Aristotle's writings, particularly his logical writings. And if you like, this represents, if you like, a high point in the Abbasid culture and civilization, where various communities come together, scholarship comes together for the, I would say, the enhancement of human knowledge. Avicenna or Ibn Sina comes at the end of this long process of translation, hundreds of years, perhaps 250 years of translation, comes together producing immediately after in the great scholars of Islam, including Ibn Sina and Al-Biruni, Ibn al-Haytham, and many other scientists of the Khwarizmi, many other scientists of this later period are relying on those translations that had been made in the Baghdad school, in the House of Wisdom, in Bayt al-Hikmah. And Ibn Sina, for example, did not know Greek. He was relying on the translations into Arabic that had been undertaken by this translation movement. And his two most important works, Ash-Shifa and Al-Qanun fi at-Tibb. So coming out of this movement were the great scholars of Islamic civilization. Now we come to Al-Ghazali. And so we come to one of the focuses of our attention, one of the texts, one of the individuals that we will be looking at in this, you will be looking at in the next few weeks. And you can see that Al-Ghazali comes after all of this. He comes after the translation movement that had gone on for hundreds of years. He comes after Avicenna or Ibn Sina dying in 1037. You can see that Al-Ghazali is born in 1058, so he represents the generation after Ibn Sina. But by the time Al-Ghazali was educated, the Islamic empire had become fragmented. So by the time of Al-Ghazali, you have fragmentation. You have the Umayyad, what is left of the Umayyads in Al-Andalus. You have the Fatimids in Egypt, and you have the Seljuks in much of the rest of the empire. You have a weak caliph by this point, and you have also the Crusades beginning during the late 11th century. So you start to see fragmentation and the weakening of the political and military weakening of the empire by the time of Al-Ghazali. And you also, but nevertheless, you are still experiencing in the cities enormous scientific and philosophical activity. So we must sort of separate a little the military and political weakness of the empire from what was going on in the cities. And the philosophical and scientific activity of the Islamic cities, the main centers, was still far beyond anything that was being done in Europe at the time. Now, Al-Ghazali was educated in the Islamic sciences, Quran, jurisprudence, theology, under the most prominent scholar of his day, Al-Juwayni. And after Juwayni's death in 1085, he joins the court of Nizam al-Mulk, who was a wazir of the Seljuks. And so he moves to Isfahan. He is born in Tus in eastern Iran. He then moves to Isfahan, working with the Seljuk Wazir Nizam al-Mulk. Now, who were the Seljuks? They were a Turkish military dynasty that ruled the Islamic heartlands under the caliph in Baghdad. So the caliph by this point was weak, but still had enormous moral importance. And so the Turkish Seljuks maintained the caliph, but they were in effective control. Nizam al-Mulk was very, very impressed by Al-Ghazali's education. He noticed that he was a remarkable scholar. He called him the proof of Islam, Hujjat al-Islam. He called him the pride of the religious leaders, Sharaf al-A'imma. And ultimately, he appoints him as the head of the Nizamiya Madrasa in Baghdad in 1091. So Al-Ghazali moves from Isfahan to Baghdad, but by this point, Al-Ghazali had really started to see that the Islamic empire, that the world that he was living in was in a period of decline, as I had mentioned. And he started to look for somebody to blame. Why was the Islamic empire now in decline? Why was it fragmented? Why was the caliph weak? Why do we have different kingdoms ruling the Islamic empire? Why don't we have that same unity as before? And one of his main focuses of attack was Ibn Sina and the philosophers of the previous generation. He said that these philosophers, people like Al-Kindi, people like Ibn Sina, resulted in too much rational focus on the rational, too much on the human reason. And therefore, his attack on them was really expressed in the incoherence of the philosophers, where he really attacks them for three positions that the philosophers had. The first is that they believed that the world was eternal. These philosophers believed, of course, that matter cannot be destroyed. And if matter cannot be destroyed, then the world is eternal. Of course, Ghazali objected to this position, believing, of course, that from his point of view, the world was created by God. And so this represented a major point of difference between him and the philosophers such as Ibn Sina. The second point of disagreement is the fact that the philosophers believed that God is omniscient, that is, he knows everything, but that he doesn't know the details. He doesn't know the particulars. So God can see the big picture, but the details of the big picture are left to individuals. And this is, of course, because the philosophers are trying to grapple with the idea of freedom, freedom of choice. And an individual who has no freedom to choose is damned from birth. And the whole idea is that you have that freedom to choose so that you are ultimately judged on your choices. If you do not have that freedom, then how can you be judged for something that God already knows? So the philosophers were grappling with this concept, with the idea of individual freedom, and they came up with the solution that God knows generalities but not particularities. And the third thing that Al-Ghazali objected to in terms of what the philosophers believe is that philosophers don't believe in a bodily resurrection. Al-Qiyamah, in both Christianity and Islam, is a physical resurrection. It's not just souls, but bodies that are resurrected. And the philosophers did not, particularly Ibn Sina, had a position against this idea. Al-Ghazali, of course, was very much against this belief, and as a result, all of these are listed in, or all these arguments are described in his Incoherence of the Philosophers, Tahafut al-Falasifa. He also had issues with the traditionalists, those who believed in blind taqlid, that is, reliance on transmitted knowledge, blind reliance on transmitted knowledge. Of course, those traditionalists would argue that this is not blind knowledge, this is transmitted knowledge, and transmitted knowledge can be just as rational as rationalizing in the here and now. So transmitted knowledge is not necessarily blind taqlid, blind adherence to previous knowledge. He also ultimately had issues with the legalists, that is, with their legal interpretation of scripture, and the mystics, those who place too much emphasis on spiritual experience in religion. That is, the mystics who believe that all experience, true experience, is purely a mystical or spiritual experience, and that one cannot derive any true knowledge from the rationalists, traditionalists, or legalists. So Ghazali had big problems in all these respects, and as a result of his doubts, as a result of his skepticism, he ultimately has a breakdown while he is in Baghdad as the head of the Nizamiya Madrasa. He has, if you like, a great moment of breakdown, and it is described here in his Al-Munqidh min al-Dalal, the text that you will be studying. He describes his breakdown and the reasons for it. He says, for nearly 6 months, beginning with Rajab 488, I was continuously tossed about between the attractions of worldly desires and the impulses towards eternal life. In that month, the matter ceased to be one of choice and became one of compulsion. God caused my tongue to dry up so that I was prevented from lecturing. One particular day, I would make all effort to lecture in order to gratify the hearts of lily following, but my tongue would not utter a single word, nor could I accomplish anything at all. And he explains the reason for this, and he says the reason for this is explained here. We next observe the laxity of men's beliefs in the principle of prophecy and in its actuality and in conduct according to the norms elucidated by prophecy. We ascertained that this was widespread among the people. When I considered the reasons for people's laxity, so he is asking, what is the reason behind the decline and weakness of faith? I found there were 4. He finds 4 reasons. A reason connected with those who engage with philosophy. So as I had mentioned to you. A reason connected with those who engage in the mystic way. A reason connected with those who profess doctrine of ta'lim. And a reason based on the practice of those who are popularly described as having knowledge. And so, having criticized the philosophers and the others, having gone into this moment of breakdown, he leaves Baghdad, he resigns from his job, and he wanders, he goes on pilgrimage. He goes on pilgrimage to seek the truth, because he came to the conclusion during this breakdown that really I cannot know the truth simply from rationalizing. Yeah? How do I know that what I know is true? Can I simply rationalize that? Well, he says, if I see something, my mind can tell me this is an illusion. Let's say I see a magician floating off the ground. My mind will tell me that this is an illusion. But how do I verify what my mind has rationalized? And that was the big question for him. How do I verify what I know to be true? And ultimately, he comes to the conclusion, as a result of this great pilgrimage that he has, he goes to Mecca, Medina, Jerusalem, and Damascus, the great centers of Islam, and ultimately comes to the conclusion that the only way that my mind can, that I can come to rest is by spiritual experience. There is no other way that I can know the truth. The only way is to experience that truth mystically. Yeah. And so for the rest of his life, and he dies in 1111 in Tus, for the rest of his life, he lives the life of a Sufi. He has students who also seek the truth in that regard. And that is ultimately the way that Al-Ghazali finds a conclusion to his great doubts. But there is also another way in which he resolves his great problem, and it's mentioned in Al-Munqidh min ad-Dalal, which you will be studying carefully, the balance. For those, he says in Al-Munqidh, for those who profess perplexity as a result of what they have heard from the party of Ta'lim, the treatment is that prescribed in the book, in our book, the just balance, Al-Qistas al-Mustaqim. And we shall not lengthen this essay by repeating it. So he says another answer to these doubts is a balance, that the philosophers, that the rationalists need to balance their approach with the other approaches, that ultimately society needs a balance between all these approaches, and that it is not enough to simply be a philosopher, that it is not enough to be a pure mystic, that it is not enough to be a pure legalist or traditionalist, that one needs a balance. And that balance is another way in which ultimately Ghazali finds an answer to the big question he is asking about truth. Now we come to the second text that you will be looking at in the next few weeks, and that is the epistles of the Ikhwan al-Safa. And these epistles, these are, if you like, 52 in number. They are in English known as the Encyclopedia of the Brethren of Purity, Rasail Ikhwan al-Safa. A giant compendium, topics covered in this text: mathematics, including geography and music, natural philosophy, including minerals and plants, and psychology, including soul and intellect, religious questions, and magic. So a vast encyclopedia of topics being covered, probably being written by this secret society of Muslim philosophers in 10th century Basra. And what is of great interest in these epistles is the fact that it represents a wonderful window into the state of knowledge at that time. So reading these epistles, you are really drawn into the 10th century. You see what was known of the time in all these different topics. And that is the great interest of the Ikhwan al-Safa. The Ikhwan, the epistles then are not pure philosophy. They are a mix of philosophy and literature. And the, if you like, the letter that you will be studying is a very famous one. It is the epistle number 22, the Risala 22. It is the case of animals versus man before the king of the jinn. And here the epistle imagines a debate between animals and humans in which the animals attempt to persuade a neutral judge that they should no longer be oppressed by humans. And an inventive and amusing discussion among the animals follows, where many animals put forward their claims to equality or even superiority relative to humans. And ultimately the humans prevail because the animals have not produced the outstanding saintly figures as those of those by humankind. So a wonderful discussion, animals being personified, making arguments. And here we have a text from the epistle. These cattle, beasts of prey, and wild creatures, all wild animals in fact, are our own slaves. We are their masters. Some have rebelled and escaped, others obey grudgingly and scorn our service. The king replied, what proof or evidence have you to back up your claims? Your Majesty, said the human, we have both traditional religious arguments and rational proofs. So here you see, if you like, that balance between the traditional and the rational that I was talking to you about a bit earlier with Al-Ghazali. The idea that one needs a balance between both to find the truth. Very well, said the king, let us hear them. Another very interesting passage. At the end of the epistle, you see, finally arose a learned, accomplished, worthy, keen, pious, and insightful man. He was Persian by breeding, Arabian by faith, a Hanif by confession, Iraqi by culture, Hebrew in law, Christian in manner, Damascene in devotion, Greek in science, Indian in discernment, Sufi in intimation, regal in character, masterful in thought, and divine in awareness. And if you like, the Ikhwan Safa therefore represent that wonderful efflorescence of the 10th century, the coming together, if you like, of those various cultures, of those various specializations, if you like, the peak of Islamic civilization is reflected in this little passage where you see the many different religions, cultures, languages, and specializations coming together in a single individual. Of course, such an individual is an imagined individual, but it is a personification, I would say, of that cultural efflorescence, that peak of Islamic culture in the 10th century that we still sing about today. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, you can email me.
يعطيك الألف عافية.